It was an evening like this that we had in mind when we pitched about 5 years ago to the museum's leadership the idea of this series. We have, for me, what is really a great honor to introduce this evening, one of the legends of landscape architecture. Rich Haag is a landscape architect of extraordinary talent. He, following his experience in military service in the war years, went to the University of Illinois for undergraduate work and then completed his bachelor's in landscape architecture at the University of California, ventured into practice and then finished his graduate work at the Harvard University Graduate School of Design in the early 1950s. Over the course of an absolutely prolific career, Rich has produced an unparalleled body of work, both in depth and breadth. He is, among other things, the only landscape architect to have received 2 ASLA President's Awards for Design Excellence for his canonical Gasworks Park in Seattle and Bloedel Reserve in Bainbridge Island, Washington. Following his experience at the GSD, setting up private practice in Seattle, he has produced several hundred individual commissions and extraordinary works that he'll say something more about this evening. For our purposes, one of the things I wanted to mention is that in addition to being among the most influential and I would say prescient landscape architects of a generation internationally, Haag's work has really anticipated an intersection of interests that we, I think, share in the field today. In this regard, his work has been extraordinary ahead of its time. The combination of design sensibility coming out of a kind of modernist understanding of space, material, and detail, but combined with the performative dimension of ecology. In addition to his work as a practicing landscape architect, of course, Rich Haag was also central to the founding of a quite significant program in landscape architecture at the University of Washington, and he's also been very active socially and politically advocating for ecological causes. Please welcome Richard Haag.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you, Charles. I'm going to go right to it because I'm going to try to do more than I can. Okay. This is the site. Gasworks was on this promontory of land that in 1903 was, the Olmsteds decided that there should be a public park there. But in 1906, a gas company bought the site and began to manufacture gas, synthetic natural gas, from coal. And later, when the locks were built and ships could come in, they switched to oil. And this is what happened to that site from 1970 to 1975. And the thing to look at is the white mound of soil there, because at that time the idea was that these sites, in fact, this is the only site of 1,500 known gas manufacturing plants in the United States, and about 5,000, 6,000 in the world that has this much of the assemblage of the original plant existing. But you do have to remember that this was not a lake in 1906. This was a bog, a wetland, and it had this kind of character with a very soft, mushy edge. And the Native Americans, they had a fishing camp on that promontory. And these are other views, a view looking from the west, and aerial plan view. It's outlined in yellow there. As you can see, it's a promontory with about 2,000 feet of shoreline and 400 feet projection into the lake. It's 20 acres in size. And that is Lake Union, and Seattle is way down in the lower, downtown Seattle in the lower left-hand corner. A few views from across the lake, and the orange is a great holding tank, and we tried to save that when we got this commission. Unfortunately, we lost that fight because the contractor was already in the demolition phase. Of course, the thing was that everyone thought this plant was a blight on the landscape and that it should be pushed into the lake, as all the other gas manufacturing plants were. A view from the lake, this is the way I saw it the first time in 1958 from a rowboat, and an assemblage of rusting and covering nearly the entire site. Aerial photo shows the red mercurochrome line that I drew there shows the old margin of the bog. So more than half the site was built out of rubble and what I call industrial afterbirth. You use terms like that, and then the reporters are really writing it all down, you see. So this shows you some of the oil slick. There were often explosions there. And as I mentioned, the site changed from coal to oil in '36 after the government locks were built. And that raised the level of Lake Union about 6 feet, 2 meters, so the oil tankers could get in there. Well, by a series of breaks, in fact, I almost lectured this thing about timely breaks and things that happen, because wonderful accidents happened. This plant was just abandoned in 1956, and in '63 the city began to make payments on this to buy this site and to see if possibly it could be converted to a public pleasure ground, a park. And the commission was a miracle that the design, Seattle did have a professional design commission, and Dan Kiley upstaged me and got a different park to do, so I got the booby prize. Some booby. So I began to haunt this site, and I had a sleeping bag. I slept around there, and I always tell my students, never ever work on a site unless you have slept on it. And another great break was 69, 70, and the societal changes were going on, and there were groupies. There were flower children, drop in, what was it? Drop in, something out, tune out, drop in, tune out. You guys know that. So I tried to drop in on her, but she would go up and I would go down. But there were a lot of crazies hanging around the site. Now, edge condition, you know how sacred that is. To any time the land meets the water, that is a sacred meeting of elements and zones. This is what had happened, that industrial afterbirth. From 50 years, they just kept pushing it out, pushing it out into the lake. And this was the edge condition. I counted something like 50 different outfalls into the lake from that plant. That's what we used to do to our environment. This shows aerial view, obviously, and I began to fall in love with this one tower. At first I thought, damn it, I'll go down to the wire. I will save this one big mother tower as a symbol, as an element. I will tell you here on the left, on your right, this is what you saw when you entered the site. You didn't even know there was a lake there unless you saw the sail of a sailboat going by or a float plane landing. And there were a lot of detailed elements that were really incredible. I mean, why in the hell do you have to go to La Brea? I mean, Seattle has its own tar pits, you know. And everyone thinks crows are so smart. They're not that smart. Some archaeologists will find this someday. And so that's the mother tower. And those are groupies. When it became known, of course, I let it be known at the university that I was going to go down to the wire and save that tower. Why these groupies started hanging around me. I know it's a derogatory term, but it really meant a lot to me. They were most helpful. The man on the very top turned out to be a state legislator now. He was in law school, and he had run Sky River Rock Festival #2. And so he knew about how to handle the press and bring them on board. He knew about timing. He introduced me to a philosopher. You should have a philosopher on your team at all times. And Adrian, after I brought him down, he almost flew off in the night. He had this doty-like thing, and he just, oh. And then he came down and he says, well, you're right. This is a different kind of landscape. But nobody will believe you. You're crazy. That's impossible. So he gave me a lot of good clues. One of them was to have a site, have an office on the site. And this was the blacksmith shop, one of the most degraded buildings there. We blew it out with a fire hose, all the soot, and we painted it off white like any good architect would do. And we hung cheap plastic banners. And we had our office, and we engaged the public there. We invited, it was open house. And we had a huge party in there, and a great storm came up, and the gas company security threw us all out in this rainstorm. And it was the greatest thing that could have happened. It united us, you know. So one thing was that the deed of transfer, the city decided to make payments of $113,000 a year for 10 years, beginning in '63 to own the site. But this young attorney, he looked at the documents and he said, what does this mean? What does this mean? All structures shall be removed to grade before the city can accept the site. We went to the gas company and said, what does this mean? And they were afraid that it meant all of the foundations, 13 feet deep down to the old lake level, would have to be bombed out and that. So we said, let's change that. And they did. And we proved that it would save them $70,1971. And we tried to get that into our design fee, but that didn't work, you know. So we began to make drawings and really get into the site, and that's the city engineer going through the exhauster building, and Irv had the great idea. This is '73. There was Middle East was all messed up, you know. So gas was being rationed. So Irv said, hey, we ought to just clean off all this pigeon guano here and reopen this site. We're going to need this energy. So we began to make these drawings and studies. And then, I had another great break. A great break was the superintendent of parks was a free thinker. You could talk to him and persuade him that, this was the greatest break though, right? I got the commission in '69, and the city wouldn't own the site till '73. When do you ever get 3 years, you know, to do a master plan, to do the site studies, and to educate? I just said, I'll use these 3 years. So the park superintendent said, well, where's the precedent? You have to have precedent. So I took a mini sabbatical, went to the university, left the university and went to Europe. And I did a lot of research, and I found that in on the left there, Bern, Switzerland. They had taken a gasometer holding tank, converted it to one to a youth hostel and one to a skating rink. And on the right, I found in Stoke-on-Trent this colliery head, and I talked to the city architect Plant, and he was going through the same thing. It's ugly, it's dangerous, it costs too much. Get rid of it. It reminds us of our industrial past, our heritage. So I began to think about it as art, as sculpture, and I made a lot of these kinds of pictures comparing what is really better here, the Burlington Northern Signal or Tinguely. And the detail, they were so beautiful. We've lost a lot of this, unfortunately. But think of tar and rust there, and the antithesis, one of the other. And yet they both have an intrinsic beauty. Ruins. We don't go back. We only go back a couple of 100 years. And this plant is only... was about 60 years old then. That was a trestle. And to engage the artists in my campaign, I decided to do this kind of comparison, promising them that we could thaw this out and have a painting in 3 dimensions. And we made a lot of fanciful studies. The ideas that we'd never intended to fulfill, but our philosopher told us you have to have something for everybody, promise everybody something. You won't get everything for everybody, but you'll get something for somebody. And photography, sketches, that's sketches by Laurie Olin. I know you know who he is, and he's the greatest hand there is in our profession. And the idea of keeping up with the Joneses, keeping up with our sister cities, that's Vancouver, British Columbia on the left, and this happens to be, I think, Osaka there. I know that's Osaka on the left, World's Fair, and this, of course, is Paris in the Tuileries. Something for everybody. New eyes for old. That's a thing Stanley White taught me at University of Illinois. Play to the theater of the mind. We have no intention of lighting the towers like that, but it opens up ideas, doesn't it? And Munich, beer garden, we really did think about having a bosque of trees like this. But later we realized the site is where you get the best impression of the air, the light, sunlight, openness of downtown, of any view in Seattle. So, but this idea served its purpose. Even the most horrible or the most terrible proposition does serve an actual purpose because it serves as a horrible example. You have to flip it and think about that. So things were going along, and then the word began to get out that I proposed not to jettison this site, but to work with its genus loci, its spirit, and to build on that. And that's why this park became a game changer, because this was the first time that an industrial ruin wasn't ravaged, vandalized, I would say, by dumping it into the lake. But the word got out, and it became highly controversial. And there are 2 major newspapers in Seattle, and one we won over by giving the reporters tours of the site. The other one we still have not won over. And they still would like to build point high-rise apartments on the site and buy a different site, you see. So this is a way, and there's Paul Goldberger down in the lower right-hand side. He's saying, wait a minute, this might be something, you know. And the woman, Miss Welch there, she said it was horrible, and yet she eulogized this this fire engine, which was in a park nearby. And we said, what the hell, we have several locomotives down there. They're just on their side, you know. Another break was one of my employees wrote an article for the Landscape Architectural magazine, and it made the cover. And then I was, this exhibition on the right went to Russia as on exhibition, toured Russia. So if I could get 3 people together, I would give a lecture, you know, I would start. This is a review of presenting the concept. I want to advise you students, well, you students can't do this, so damn it. But I learned this in school. You can talk concept and all, and free up the mind of your instructor, your teacher, but once you give them a plan, oh my God, they can shred it. They're pros, you know. So don't show plans until you're ready. So I was just pushing this concept of new eyes for old. Let's take a good look at this before hell, you know, we can always tear the damn thing down. We can always do that. So I have a backup position. Anyhow, you can, if you read these, the red dot means here's another technique. When you present something like that and you notice the audience is going along, you say, I think I sense consensus here. Why didn't someone put a motion on the table, you know, and get that red dot? But my own profession was really, in fact, my own office, I had to fight them. They knew I was nuts. We had this professional design commission in Seattle, which has now lost its power, but at that time they matched consultants with the project. And there I am in the blacksmith shop presenting these site analysis studies, site analysis, getting their buy-in. So there's the mayor, Mayor Ullman. And the park superintendent said you have to meet with him on Friday and talk to him about this. And I said, no, I can't do that. I said, how about Friday a week? Well, he gave me about 10 days. So I went to, and the mayor had been on television saying his first official act was to go in with a acetylene torch and start torching everything down. So I hired a student of mine for $800. I paid him to make that fanciful watercolor. So I had the superintendent give that to the mayor, and the mayor, well, maybe it's not so bad. Let him go a little further, you know. And then you should know that landscape architecture is the art of visual swindle. There is no way in hell that you're going to portray the landscape, especially with computers. There's no way you can do it. Even with video, you know, you don't have the smell, the breeze, you don't have all that ambience you have in nature. So here's the visual swindle. You have to be careful if you get caught, it's bad. But so we decided to make this model of before and after. And if you're smart enough, you'll see that the camera angle, pictures don't lie, but the reverse isn't true. We try to get as much white. And another thing is the way you phrase things. I learned so much on this project, is that if you tell a reporter or a critic, I only intend to save 40% of the buildings. Well, but if you tell him, the buildings I save will only cover 5% of the site. I mean, the nastiest, meanest banker used to give you 5%. They don't anymore. Then there was this wealthy woman in Seattle who fought me all the way, and fortunately I outlived her. But she hired this engineers from Glendale, and they came in and they said, this site is just, it's an ecological disaster area. You have to drive pipes through the site and steam and cook it. Of course, that'll only cost $40 million, but another break was the Boeing aircraft laid off a lot of people, and we got some of them down there, and they said that they designed a pump which generated 29,000 pounds per square inch of air pressure. So those machines in those buildings that had 40, 50 years of crud on them and tar and everything, we could blast that off with just water without grit or chemicals. So the idea came along that I wanted to have several demolition things. It's like you have a great old apple tree. You know what should come out, and then you climb down, and then you need several prunings to do it right. So they only gave me two shots at demolition. So I went through and put R for remove and S for save. Apparently some vandal didn't agree with me on that. So the machines, we figured out how to sanitize them. How about the soil? The soil, this was a known thing. The site had been abandoned from 55 to 70, and nothing grew on that site. Virtually, it was so sterile. It's better to say sterile than poisoned, but they amount to the same thing. See? It was so bad. What are we going to do? Well, I should tell you, get the best damn consultants you can, because they don't cost any more than mediocre. And I had a man, engineer, and he said, let's get Labos down. That's an old man who, he just doesn't have a formal education, but let's get him down here and ask him what to do. And Labos came down, and he kicked around, and he said, you can get anything you want to grow here within a year. And we said, oh, you're crazy. What do we do? And he said, air. You got to break through these oil slick, these layers, aerate the site, oxygen, and sunlight, and rain, water. And if you want to, you can fertilize it a bit, just to stimulate the indigenous bacteria. So this was the beginning of bioremediation, which finally the EPA finally recognizes as a way to detoxify soils, especially hydrocarbon molecules. And so there we go. We're still, there's Laurie's sketch again, and we made this great collage because it was just more fun, and just again to play to the theater of the mind. And we began to name things, the prow where the ships used to pull up to unload the oil. And we're separating the site along the railroad tracks and having parking to the north. And we're showing us the sailboat, historic ship harbor there, and just playing around a little bit. Still no plan. And if you make those strong drawings like this, well, then you can move in with your camera and you can do a whole lecture on things like this. So it was going to be called Myrtle Edwards Park because a councilwoman who was instrumental in the city purchasing the site in '63, they decided they were going to name this park after her, which was fine with us. But the thing was that her family used to go or follow me around at the lectures and jeer at me and so on. So that was very disconcerting. I would hate to have that happen in this place because I could see the tomatoes coming down. No way to avoid them. So finally, we did the master plan. And in fact, my office was saying, "God, you got to do something, you know." So even then, we decided to take that the black and white model and to turn it into a three-dimensional model. You can see the main features, and the shoreline is softened, the major grading, and then, we had the idea of taking the footings of these buildings and the very worst soil, the tar masses and all, and piling them up and making a mound of rubble and then covering it with that white clay glacial till that you saw in the very early aerial view. At one point, the argument got so hot that the park department withdrew their support, and so it became a real political football. So the thing was that the city council then had a public meeting, and there are 200 here. There were about 700 people came, and I presented this approach that you've just been through, and but no plan, concept. And 2 days later, and this wealthy woman stood up in the audience, the first question, and said, "This is rubbish. He can't deliver this. This is all visual swindle, you know." So, but the thing was, the city council 3 days later voted unanimously to support the concept. So we can control the structures, the machines, and save those, and we can regrade and restore this site. A lot of this is restoration, isn't it? And that's our drawing there of earthworks computation, balancing cut and fill. And that's a premise of mine I use on all these kinds of recycling projects, that nothing leaves the site. We will find the benefit. And so there we are, cutting down through about 15 feet of that industrial afterbirth down to a soft edge. I think that drawing by hand and planimeter and Prismacolor, this is all BC, you know, before computers. I think that could be in the Gardner somewhere, if we can find the original. And according to Mr. Labo, we decided to use all the sawdust and grass clippings and work them into the site, till them in. And there's this sawdust, which was being hauled up and dumped in the Indian reservation tidelands, which is a ecological disaster, you know. And then the black stuff is sewage, sludge. Every citizen in Seattle contributed to this success of this park. I mean, Laurie Olin loves that. He thinks it's really kind of, you know, he wants me to live in the tower and send up a little smoke now and then, like a hermitage in the English gardens, you know. And there we are tilling. And we had 20 acres of tomatoes, and there was a big stink about that. The tomatoes in this polluted soil, and they were tested against commercial tomatoes from the San Joaquin Valley, and we had less heavy metals. So that issue was dropped. This is a Zelkova that I raised from seed that I brought from Japan in 54, I'm sorry. And I root pruned it, of course, as you can see, and then we planted it in one of the worst places. The thing was that the winter rains brings the hydrocarbons up. Their oil is lighter than water. And this tree was a test tree. And it barely survived those first winters. But you should come there now and hug that tree. And here we are reconstructing, and we took the sheet metal and all was very rusted because of the sulfuric acid and rain and condensation. It attacks the metal, but these oldest buildings, the wooden frame buildings, it rather like pickles the wood. They were preserved. So we made studies and we proved that we could save those buildings and the money that it would take to demolish them and haul them away or something. If we put that in reconstruction, we could have these great covered play spaces. There's an aerial view. It's pretty early, but you can see the two buildings on the upper right are covered with translucent plastic. And we've saved the 6 towers that were down the spine of the site. Oh, I use that argument. At first I was just going to save the big mother tower. And then I said, that's Myrtle Edwards. And her husband is behind her, always in her shadow. And then they have 4 children. Who would break up a family, So another trick I do is I always have a lot of things in the construction documents that I never intend to have built. And that way I can build up a fund for the contractor by saying, I'll forget that, but I want this saving. Itemize your bids. And then you take those savings and you throw a big party at the end. So that's what we did. The Seattle Park Department still has not officially opened the site. That tells you something. And here it was announced that I was there and designer, and so the woman there, the mother on the left, popped down from there and ran up and gave me a kiss on the lips. Fringe benefit, huh? And here we are. Before, after, obviously. Recently, the park department, because of graffiti, they came in and painted the whole thing this terrible, I won't say it, brown color. So the Friends of Gasworks Park got on their case and they had to come in and repaint it all. A sculptor came and he said he wanted to, many sculptors came, in fact one came from Russia, to do projects on the site. And this one, I said, what are you going to do, Chuck? He said, I'll do some iron seagulls or something. Chuck, my God, we have real seagulls. Why would you do that? So I said, I'd like to do a big sundial. And I have these 80-foot stacks, but I can't figure out. I'd have to tear down some wonderful buildings. Anyhow, I implanted the idea, and he went away and researched it and came up with the idea of an autonomic sundial. And here we are chalking it out. First, I wanted to build it on the prow as an excuse to get people up in the towers. So the sundial, when you come, I know you're going to come. When you come, be sure and climb Kite Hill, which is a repository of the foundations and the worst tar and heavy polluted soils. And this is the mayor that replaced Ullman, and he's up there. I know how these projects go. First time you suggest it, they say, what the hell, you're crazy. That's impossible. And then you go around and come back and they say, but it's socialistic, or it's not certainly not Christian. And then you come back again and they say, hell, it'll cost too much, And then finally, when you get it all lined up, when they come up and they congratulate you and say, "Isn't this great what we did together?" Every public project, watch it. And this woman and her mate came from Australia, and to fly this kite of 1,000 pieces, and I helped him assemble it, and he ran up the hill, and the kite went up, crashed, and she turned and said, "Rather like sex, isn't it? All that build-up." I don't know about those Australians. Well, so it's a very open, spontaneous play space. These are retired architects that are doing a watercolor class there. And photography is a big thing. And, and here's some views there downtown in Lake Union, which is a lake now. And kids in the grass. Another great break was this man who spoke Russian and German, and he did this drawing of how it all worked. And then the Friends of Gasworks Park. My wife started this organization, and there we are, a hardy band, just to become stewards of the park, because the park department, they still don't know what to make of this place. And up until a few years ago, there was a line item in the budget every year to remove the towers. So the Friends of Gasworks Park were instrumental in getting the city, the state, and now on the National Registry. And here we are with a model camera obscura. And about 6 years ago, the park department was going to fence off the park and make it for summer concerts, which sounds great. But it's privatization of public space, and we took them to court. And the judge said we had legal standing and ran the city out of there. And the playground was completely demolished and neglected, and the city took down the rungs. And so guess what? That's 4th of July. So now we're jumping for something entirely different. As they say in Monty Python, we go to Bloedel. I did a lot of projects there, one every summer, because that's when you can work on the earth there. It's because of our rain and high water table there. And that's the mansion. And that terrace was done by Thomas Church. There are many landscape architects who worked there. And here I am with Mr. Bloedel down there. I wanted to, remove, you can see a figure there on the left. So that figure's 6 feet. Say, I wanted to cut off 30 feet to get down to where those cedar trees came out of the bluff. I told Mr. Bloedel, I said, eventually your house will be consumed in the bay. And don't say things like that to clients. He was awake many nights worried about that. So I decided that I needed earth, and I decided to take the hill down 30 feet. And here I am with a contractor, and it looks like a war zone. And there's Mr. Bloedel, my Medici, for these many years, a lumber baron. And he's looking around, and he used to say he'd get to a beautiful place, and he'd say, "Where every prospect pleases, but only man is vile." Huh? So I went off to Europe, and we hit blue clay, so he stopped the process. But I took all of that, there it is on the left, and his mansion, it's a stucco stud wall construction house. But anyhow, and there's the big mound there on the right. I took all of that excess soil. Nothing leaves the site. And I built that mound, which you will see again. And my path at the top of the hill collapsed. And his soil engineer, a geotech, built a flood wall down at the bay without permission or anything, to tide level it failed too. So I don't feel too badly. In fact, these site artists, I'd show that slide and say, oh, God, isn't that wonderful? So we did many projects, a major project. I got this commissioned by luck again, and this is one thing on a site. I always figure out how high you can go and how low you can go. Dig hole, dig bowl, make knoll. Landscape is so easy, isn't it? And then if water comes in your bowl, and then a tree comes, and then the birds come, it's such a simple art. And every week I went out there for one day, every Thursday, and he expected some drawings every week, so I'd be on the ferry boat. It's 35 minutes making up something like this. But one of you students could do at least not a PhD, but a master's out of following this idea of trying to have on 140-acre site every episode in man's intervention in nature. Then this is my wife actually told me to put these four sequence together. I actually had the stupid idea at one time of trying to do gardens that portrayed 7 steps of Buddhist meditation. How about that? That was really silly. And he had this famous swimming pool there by the famous guest house. And I could tell you all about the history of this site changing from private to public. It was a big tax dodge, 10 acres at a time. And so anyhow, so I was on site in '69, and I worked on that rectangle in the middle. That was a pool that was designed by Thomas Church, actually, and the soil engineer, and it was becoming obsolete. So that was one of the episodes. But the first episode we'll begin at your far left there is the Garden of Plains. And here it is in the various stages of construction. See the blue mound back there? That's the soil that I took from the bluff to rather contain that space. And I really didn't want those aluminum armatures in there because I wanted the moss to cover all, but they said, well, it won't be maintained. And this wealthy woman, she was still alive then, and she said, this is terrible. And I condoned her and did it all in turkey grits. But there is an enigmatic quality to this Garden of Plains, and that is that it is similar to Ruanji, which has 15 stones, literally, but when you go where the monks are supposed to go, you can only see 14 from any position. So this geometry, here we can see 1, 2, 3 planes. But you walk around, but if you see the plan there, there's 4 and 4. There's 8 planes. So it does have that kind, and I called it an ode to J. Appleton, who was a great theorist, prospect and refuge. And Mr. Bloedel bought into that because he brought J. Appleton to the States several times. So these are views, different views, obviously. During construction, I had to rough it out with just gravel. And anyhow, this, unbeknownst to me, when I lost favor when his Bloedel's son-in-law became director of the Arbor Fund, and Sir Peter Shepard and other experts were brought in as a committee. Avoid these committees. When you work one-on-one, I really thought, so they did this half-ass Ruanji. Look at that, half-vast, it's really small. And there's only 7 rocks there. And then you go from there into the moss garden, and you will see that there's couplets here. There's something that's really geometric. Man obviously intervened, and then here with a very soft touch, we just a landscape by extraction, by subtraction. So we took out a lot of the blackberries and things and discovered this moss, and the moss covers all. And these stumps were from, I forgot to mention, this 140-acre forest was deforested in around 1870, so 100 years ago. And they came in and they got all the cedar, and then they came back and got the big firs. So what we see, those are stumps there that Mr. Bloedel had, he was really ambivalent about saving those because it did remind him of logging. So look up. I maybe made it too open, so I introduced some, hey, Jackson Pollock, eat your heart out. I mean, can you get movement in your paintings? Birds come in, darkness comes. Come on. Even Georgia O'Keeffe. Oh, in the moss garden, a woman there was Rademacher Fry. And she was quiet. You just hear the water dripping, and you smell the rotten wood and the stench of decay, you know. And she finally said, "But Rich, where are the dinosaurs?" So I knew I got right down into her brainstem. And here then you do see this through the woods. Through the moss garden, you see these lines are drawn. You say, ooh, what's going on there? So you look at that plan again, the sequence of plan. So you can see the geometry and then the amorphous natural forms and then the pure geometry. We're going to go into this room. And I was first brought into this room. It looked like that on the left. And Thomas Church with Twelker had done this pool. And that's actually the groundwater table. So that was in about 60s, early 60s. And then Church and Prentice fell out or something. It was just left and abandoned. And so he invited me in, and I came up with this idea of the room, of the reef. Just put this in a room. And so he and his wife are buried. Their urn is down there in the lower left-hand corner. And some quick views of the geometry. This window to the sky, it's as though you never really saw the forest until you see it reflected. And the detail and the pollywogs come in and ducks come in to eat them and dragonflies and mosquitoes and the whole thing turns with pond scum. You know, this is what happens in landscape. Nature is pushing at us. There's all kinds of optical illusions, and for a long time I would never show this aerial view to my students, but there is something going on. You stand at the end and you ask, what's the width to the depth, to the length? And they say, oh, it's 3 or 4 times. Well, look at it. Huh? Water does these fantastic, magical tricks on your senses. So now we're going from that pool through the hedge back to the bird sanctuary. There it is. And of course I have a broken line there. It's a quarter of a mile or more back there, so you get you decompress after going from the reflection pool. And there's a group of students on the trail. We did a lot of trails. So there was an irrigation pond there, which was rather, it was beautiful, you know. It had a dumb shape, but you don't notice that when you're on the ground. And then this is the spoils from that. This is a wetland bog. And I never met a wetland I couldn't improve, contrary to what all the ecologists say. And I had planted these aspen back when I worked on the reflection pool in '69. And all those Bloedel's friends thought he'd gone crazy planting aspen, you know. So this was the joining of the waters. We got special equipment with wide treads, and I hear I made a bad mistake. Nothing leaves the site. Well, we took all the peat moss and put it on his forestry, where he was plantation to grow small firs. I made a bad mistake. See on the right, that mound? This pool only had six hummocks in it. Everybody knows 6 is not a magic number, so I created the 7th one. Great, huh? And the first winter, just stupid me. But the birds came in, and the red-winged blackbirds and the swans are doing their mating ritual. And that is a rare glimpse of a lowland silverback. And then Charles asked me for some recent work, so I blame this on him. So if you go to my website, you'll see something like this. And it is a collage of different projects. Many of my clients now are billionaires, and I have to sign letters of confidentiality to work on their projects. But I can swipe a few details here and there, and this is my whole theory and perception thing about space being the most important element we work with, and then scale, and then circulation, and earth forming. Oh, I love earth forming. Earth is so sensual. And then water, of course. Water is the magic element, ties it all together. And plants, that is a purview of our department. This is what we do, plants. And we use plants in aesthetic ways. We're the only profession that really does that. So I thank you for your attention. I want to thank Charles. I want to thank Joanne Robinson and the donors, anonymous donors that got us together.
Lovely. Will you take a question or two?
R2, yes.
Or two.
All right.
We're contractually obliged to at least 2 questions. So.
Yeah, sure. Excuse me. Yes.
I was curious, you spoke a lot about how you were able to save the industrial ruins at Gasworks Park, but I'm curious what your initial motivation for doing that was. If you could talk about that.
Sure. Okay. Well, when you do site planning we can do an analysis of, and I can give. I've done this step by step. Design, I don't know if you can teach design. Site planning, you can teach. So there are several things. One of them, I said, sleep on the site is one of them. And you always look for the most sacred thing on a site. And I had no rock outcroppings, no forest. I did have a water's edge, but you saw what it looked like. I did have this tower. And I decided, damn it, that's it. That's the most sacred thing on this site. So you want to honor that. Sometimes it's not on the site, it might be contextual, but that's one of the tricks of site planning, and look for the sacred thing, try to get in the spirit of the site. I'll tell you a really quick story. In '63, I gave this site to 13 different schools of landscape architecture. There were 13 accredited programs at that time, and it was called exchange program. And the new professors were supposed to give a program to all the students. So I was new. So I took the gasworks because it was in the news, because the city was beginning to buy the site, first payment. So I sent out aerials and some eye-level pictures, topography to these schools. And 6 weeks later, I got 130 entries, and not one student saved one building on that site. I had a lot of Sydney opera houses, because that had just one. I had junior colleges, I had mini zoos and everything, but every student pushed everything out. Okay, all right, thank you.
So I noticed that in one of the pictures, there was a fence around the tower area.
Oh, yes.
Is that something that you planned, or was that forced upon you?
No, if you noticed, in one of the early schemes, I had a moat around there, thinking that if you walked through the water, we could make it radioactive, or your shoes would glow or something, and then it showed that you really wanted to get on those towers. And so there was an accident during construction where a 11-year-old boy took a ladder from the construction in the play barn there and climbed up and fell and was injured. And there was a lawsuit, and the city named the contractor, and the contractor named me. And fortunately, my groupie, who turned out to be this wonderful attorney, he looked through my contract, and miraculously there was a clause in there that had been crossed out that eliminated me from any lawsuits. And so then the city said, okay, Haag, you become our expert witness. That's the way the law works. So anyhow, this boy did recover and played basketball that fall, but he did have a memory loss for a while. So they did put that around as what they call an institutional prevention, that 8-foot fence with and that fence has to come down. It's a great challenge now to the people that, we have thrill seekers in our society. They used to be able to join the French Foreign Legion or now the Jihad or something, but we do have those people, and they want to climb up there and tag. And some graffiti is art, but some is not. So I have mixed emotions, but I know if they take the fence down, and we have a meeting, the Friends of Gasworks Park, with the park engineer next week to discuss that. And I'm sure if we take the fence down, we almost accomplished that at one time, but that we will have less graffiti. We will have less graffiti. So the fence has to come down, absolutely. That is centerpiece. And we will do a camera obscura in there and all kinds of vertical museums and games uninvented. Yeah. Yes, Gary.
I have to say it was a great pleasure to hear such a personal view of works that so many of us know. We know about those works. But to hear your version of those in person,
Thank you.
you realize that it took incredible courage and strength, but it also is filled with humility. And that's, that's a remarkable thing, which I think is hard to get in an essay, it's hard to get in a history book, but it comes across personally. I want to ask about, though, your formation, because what some of us know is that you grew up in a nursery business, so you were always surrounded by trees. And also you spent 2 years in Japan at a time when I think it was probably fairly exotic to do that, in the early 50s. And I'm conscious of how many students are here and how many recent graduates are here, and it would be interesting to know what your advice would be for a person who, like yourself at age, 24, after getting your degrees, that you would go and invest your time in an exotic place and have something else deeply added to your ethos. What would you say, and maybe generations before that would go to see Italian gardens, they would go to the English landscape or the French 18th century gardens. What would you say would be a great way to spend 2 years today as a 24-year-old to contribute to one's formation as a landscape architect?
When I went to Japan, I went there as an escape hatch, just like I joined the Army to get out of Kentucky. As soon as I can, So I wrote to George Nakashima, whom some of you might know and know by reputation and history. I said, George, I got a scholarship, and actually Lester Collins told me to take this application as I said goodbye and thanked him for the tough year and a half I spent at Harvard. And I said, George, what should I do? And he took a sheet of his paper and he wrote 3 words on there: keep your eyes open. That was the best advice ever given. Well, it's like new eyes for old, or new math, the new math. So I would say there's just a whole world there, and you might get the best travel logs and videos and everything, but it's just like the landscape. You got to get into it, and do that before you get encumbered with your wonderful children and maybe even grandchildren. Some of you, I'm looking around. And travel, get out there, and the world is just our oyster, as somebody said, yeah. And you never know your own country until you leave it. And all the Peace Corps people, it's not what they take. It's what they bring back, So I know there are a lot of avenues of foreign travel now for you, and a lot of the world is closed down, which is a damn shame. And it's something we have to do something about. And that's my advice. Get out there and learn about yourself and your country. I did get involved in Zen, but I found it rather superficial and so self-indulgent. Excuse me, but anyhow, it is one of the more peaceful kind of philosophies if you are looking for something like that. One final thing here now, but thank you, Gary, for that. I appreciate that. One final thing. I recently lectured, and there's a woman sitting right there, a frail woman, and she was listening, Mr. Ritchie, you have some strange ideas. Are you writing any of this down? I said, yes, ma'am, I am. I'm writing 101, what's the word? 101 unconventional truths about landscape. Oh, wonderful. And are you going to publish when? I said, yes, ma'am. As a matter of fact, probably posthumously. And she, oh, wonderful. The sooner the better.